Hello and welcome back to the channel for another Doctor Who video. So after many months of speculation, we now know how the 13th Doctor regenerates and what her regeneration scene looks like, but it could have ended up unfolding in a slightly different way. That's according to the shooting script for The Power of the Doctor, which has been released by BBC Writers' Room in the past few days. Writers' Room is a wonderful resource, for scripts and stuff in terms of BBC shows. There's a load of Doctor Who scripts on there, including, I think, the majority of Series 11, 12 and Flux, and of course now the 3 specials from this year as well. And it's always really interesting to kind of go through these scripts and see how they differ from the final products that we see on TV. In fact, at a Madman Not a Box on Twitter has done a marvellous thread detailing all of the differences in this particular case of The Power of the Doctor between the episode and the script. And there are quite a few kind of cuts or revisions or bits that were sort of ADR'd in that aren't present in the script. So that's definitely worth checking out if you're interested in that sort of thing. But one of the most intriguing discrepancies between the script and the finished episode comes in the regeneration scene. So originally the regeneration would have looked quite different, and the 13th Doctor's final lines and final monologue would also have been different. Now Chris Chibnall had sort of said as much already in other interviews. He kind of opened up about how the 13th Doctor's final lines were changed in the edit. It was the editor, Becky Trotman, who kind of suggested that they kind of structure things differently, and that's the version of the scene they ended up going with. But when we actually look at how the scene appeared in the shooting script, things are a little bit more complicated. So originally, Chibnall said that the order of the 13th Doctor's final 2 lines was flipped, which would logically suggest that the Tag You're It line came before the bit about wanting to know what happens next. And indeed, that is how the lines appear in the shooting script, but there's also another line in there right at the end of the speech that was actually cut from the finished episode. So the 13th Doctor's final words were originally as follows. Right then, Doctor whoever I'm about to be. Tag, you're it. That's the only sad thing. I want to know what happens next. I bet it's going to be brilliant. So there we have it. The 13th Doctor's final line and final word essentially was brilliant. So it would have kind of come full circle, right from her very first scene in Twice Upon a Time, her first word, brilliant. That would also have been her last word. And indeed, in the episode as it was filmed, and for Jodie Whittaker filming that scene, that was her last word and that was her last line. And it was only in the edits that things were changed. But that's not the only difference between the scene as it appears in the script and in the episode. So originally, the 13th Doctor would have walked out of her TARDIS, on the top of Durdle door, which, by the way, is specified in the script, so that is specifically something which Chris Chibnall, wanted to include. It wasn't just a randomly selected bit of coastline. And just in case it's escaped you, Durdle door does have a particular significance for Chris Chibnall and for this era of Doctor Who, because it's down in Dorset. It's part of the Jurassic coastline down in Dorset, which is also where the Broadchurch Cliffs are located, slightly further along at West Bay. But yes, that part of the scene does translate onto TV as it appears in the script. And she says that line about the blossomist blossom, and that's the point at which the script diverges from what we see on screen, or indeed vice versa. Because in the script, the 13th Doctor then sits down, cross-legged, and remains in that position for the rest of the scene, and indeed for the regeneration itself. Which, it is an interesting sort of choice, that. It's kind of one which I guess you can sort of see why they didn't go with it in the end, because it might have looked slightly peculiar for such an iconic moment, for this Doctor and for the show. But at the same time, there must have been a reason why that was specified in the script. Presumably it changed relatively late in the day, just prior to filming, I guess. I wonder whether there were meant to be allusions there to kind of like meditation and Buddhism and stuff like that, like a kind of Buddha pose almost. Because interestingly enough, that kind of came into the show with producer Barry Letts back in the 70s, with the Third Doctor's regeneration story. And that was very much influenced by those sort of ideas. So maybe kind of Chris Chibnall was taking a leaf out of Barry Letts' book there and trying to kind of include an allusion to all those ideas, or maybe it's something that he's personally interested in himself. Or maybe it's kind of just intended to be a more general sort of meditation pose of the Doctor kind of being there, sat cross-legged, sort of like being at peace with herself, at peace with the universe perhaps. Perhaps that was the idea they were trying to communicate there. But yes, that is how the scene would have ended, with the shots of the Doctor sat cross-legged in front of the TARDIS on top of Durdle door, consumed by regenerative energy. It would have been a very interesting one, like I say, very different to what we've seen before, a sort of halfway house between kind of the standing up regenerations that we've seen in the modern era and the original kind of classic series precedent for the Doctor to regenerate lying down, like with the First Doctor, with the Third Doctor, with the Fourth Doctor, etc. So it's certainly been a very different look, but I guess maybe it kind of might have invited criticisms that the Doctor wasn't kind of as strong as her predecessors. She couldn't kind of take it standing up, she had to sit down. And obviously that is a ridiculous thing to throw at the show, a ridiculous criticism. But yeah, I can sort of see that maybe that kind of thing might have come their way, and for that reason they kind of had it at the pass and sort of thought, actually, we'll just do it in the traditional way, like all the male Doctors that came before her, in the revived era. Stick to that precedent, have that kind of that power pose almost of her stretching her arms out and the regeneration energy firing up into the sky and all that kind of stuff. And and also I suppose as well, it kind of meant that David Tennant's first scene as the 14th Doctor would have been of him sat down as well. And I guess logistically as well, that might have been a more difficult thing to kind of coordinate, especially with the outfit changing. Like that would have been a very kind of complex shot, even more so than it was already if it was standing up, if the Doctor had been sat down at that moment. So you can kind of see, for a variety of reasons why that might not have worked, logistically speaking, but I think it is a nice idea, and it'll be interesting to hear kind of the thought behind that, I guess. I mean, with the final line thing as well, that is something where you can sort of see that, okay, they kind of had sort of 3 points in that monologue where, they could have ended it. Any of those kind of different sentences could have been the 13th Doctor's final sentence and final line. And indeed, I kind of heard a lot of people sort of say that when they were watching it go out on the night, they're kind of wondering, whether that line was the final line. And then there was another bit, and it's kind of like, okay, was that line the final line? No, there's a bit more. So I can definitely see why they would have wanted to tighten that speech up a little bit in the edits. But even so, it's kind of interesting to think that, until very late in the day, indeed as it was filmed, the 13th Doctor's final line was going to be different. It's kind of the stuff that you put on the t-shirts and everything, and in the books, and the stuff that goes down in history, the Doctor's first line and the Doctor's last line. And so to think that that was, very different until very, very late in the day is quite a strange thought, and possibly unprecedented in the show's history. Now, I can't think of another case of a Doctor's final scene changing quite so much. So those are two really interesting insights. It's a great thing that we've got this script so we can find these things out for ourselves. But what do you think about the scripted version of the 13th Doctor's regeneration scene compared to how it ended up looking on TV? Do you think the original final line was better or worse than what we ended up with? And likewise, do you think the 13th Doctor, should have regenerated, sat down in a cross-legged position, or do you think it was kind of better for them to go with that, more traditional standing up power pose? Whatever your thoughts on all this, please let me know down in the comments below, and I hope you learned something new from this video. If you have enjoyed it, please do leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you're new for more stuff like this in the future. And if you'd like to go one step further, you can support the channel on Patreon via the link in the video description. But otherwise, until the next one, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye for now.